Thank you very much. Dr. Moore, we're told this is a great report. It's been peer-reviewed. We got lots of comments back on it. Why wouldn't they release it?
Well, if it's been peer-reviewed, then somebody has corroborated the supposed fact that there are 6.2 million species that we don't know exist. So I'm not quite clear how any scientist would peer-review something that says that. That's the center of the whole thing. A million species could nowhere near be endangered if we recognize that there are
We've actually cataloged about 1.8.
Yes, 1.8 million it's slightly less than that. It's rounded off. But
so the rest we're simply assuming exist.
Fictitious, yes.
Is that science to your mind?
Categorically not.
Maybe that's.
And anybody who peer-reviewed a paper that claimed there were 6.2 million unnamed species is not a scientist.
Well, I think they should probably release that report then, because if they have suddenly discovered 6 million new species and cataloged them, assigned them classifications, that's probably one of the greatest breakthroughs in the history of science, and we ought to get that information right away, don't you think?
Well, I for one would like to know, for example, with the drastic decline in marine biodiversity, which is in capital letters on a heading in this Dr. Shin's report, I would like to know, other than the Atlantic right whale, I'm pretty good on marine biology, other than the Atlantic right whale, give me 5 marine species that have gone extinct in the last 50 years.
We've actually done several hearings on the right whale, and what we discovered is we hunted them to near extinction, and now the gene pool in the North Atlantic population is so small, they're having a very difficult time coming back, but their populations are thriving in other parts
Almost
of the ocean.
all other whale species are recovering well after we went out in the 1970s.
As is the right whale in the Southern Atlantic and Pacific.
Correct. I don't know of a list of marine species that have gone extinct lately, and I think biodiversity means the number of species. It's different than biomass, and it's true that overfishing has caused a reduction in some populations' biomass in the ocean, but I'd like someone to give me the names of a list of the species that have gone extinct in the oceans. I don't know of any.
Dr. Moore, Hermann Hart of Helmut-Schmidt University in Hamburg, Germany, wrote an April 2019 article where he suggests that CO2 doesn't regulate global warming, but in fact global temperatures themselves dominantly control CO2 levels. And in fact, by unanimous consent, I'd like to enter that into the record.
Without objection.
And I wonder if you could elaborate on that.
Yes, well, especially during this Pleistocene Ice Age, which they agree was set on about 2.6 million years ago. For the first 1.5 million years, the glaciations were on a 40,000-year cycle in line with the tilt of the Earth. For the last 1 million years, they've been on a 100,000-year cycle in line with the changes in the shape of the Earth's rotation from more elliptical to less elliptical around the sun. And during those periods, as the oceans cooled going into glaciations, large amounts of CO2 were sucked out of the air, ingassing or absorption of the CO2, because cold water holds more gas than warm water does. It's like when you take a glass of water out of the fridge and put it on your counter, little bubbles form in it as it warms up. That's the gas coming out. When the oceans warm, like they did coming into the modern age now, you had CO2 coming back out of the oceans. The oceans have 40 times as much CO2 in them as the atmosphere does, so a 1% change in oceanic CO2 makes a big change in atmospheric CO2. There is no doubt in the Vostok Ice Core records and other ice core records that it is the warming of the oceans and the cooling of the oceans that is causing the changes in CO2 in the atmosphere. Now, since we started using fossil fuels, we are the dominant influence of CO2 in the atmosphere, causing it to rise back to levels that are more conducive for the survival of life on Earth than they had become during the peaks of the last 4, 5, 6 glaciations, when they sunk to within 30 parts per million of the death of plants.
I need to pause right there because I want to get one more question in, and that is, you're one of the original founders of Greenpeace. The health of our oceans has been a lifetime passion for you. Could you give us a quick recap of the state of our coral reefs?
Well, one of the great bright lights is the advent of aquaculture, which is now producing over 50% of the seafood that we are eating every day around the world. And this promises to take pressure off the wild stocks We do need more regulation in international waters on fisheries because it's there's no regulation out there in many cases. But
thank you, Dr.
The world's
Moore.
fisheries are not endangered with extinction.
Thank you, Dr. Moore.